Tier 1. Scientology. Scientology is one of those rabbit holes that gets weirder the deeper you fall. On the surface, it looks like just another religion with fancy buildings, celebrity endorsements, and even something that kinda resembles sermons. But the moment you start peeling back the layers, you realize it's a sci-fi thriller, courtroom drama, and con job all wrapped in one. Or at least that's what some people say. It all started with L. Ron Hubbard, a science fiction writer who woke up one day and said, "Therapy is too slow, so I'll invent my own version of it." Okay, so maybe that's not exactly what he said, but you get the point. His first idea, Dianetics, was pitched as a type of self-help therapy. But when that flopped and his organization went bankrupt, he decided to try a different approach. And that's how Scientology was born. Same ideas, new tax benefits. At the heart of Scientology is auditing, where you pay to spill your deepest traumas into a machine, while an auditor uses a machine called an e-meter to measure emotional responses. It doesn't sound so bad until you realize each session costs money, and getting clear is just the beginning. Next comes the operating Thetan levels, where followers hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars just to find out the religion's core belief. People who practice Scientology believe that an alien warlord named Xenu dumped billions of souls into volcanoes some 75 million years ago, and blew them up with nukes. Those traumatized alien souls, known as body Thetans, were somehow now causing people mental and spiritual harm. And those body Thetans, according to Hubbard, they're clinging to you right now. They're why you're depressed, anxious, or broke. Not your life decisions. Alien ghosts, obviously. But it's not just the alien terrorist behavior that's creepy. The organization has been accused of everything from forced abortions to spying on governments. In the 70s, they infiltrated the US government, broke into offices, stole documents, and got caught. Several members went to prison. Even L. Ron himself was convicted of fraud in France, but the church kept going, fighting legal battles around the world to be recognized as a legit religion. Some countries, like the US and Australia, gave in. Others, like Germany and France, straight up labeled it a dangerous cult. So, is Scientology a religion, a business, or a sci-fi scam? I'll let you be the judge of that. Santa Muerte cults. If you walk through certain neighborhoods in Mexico City, you might catch a glimpse of a glass case stuffed with candles, tequila, cigarettes, and candy. Inside, there's a skeletal figure draped in a red, black, or golden robe. That's Santa Muerte, the personification of death, otherwise called the Bony Lady. And that makeshift altar you just encountered is just one of thousands. The Bony Lady isn't your usual saint. She doesn't come from the Bible, and the Catholic Church wants nothing to do with her. Worshipping Santa Muerte comes across as a bit dark, so it's more a personal religion rather than a public one. Most rituals happen in cramped apartments, behind convenience stores, or in the back rooms of tattoo parlors. Her altars are decorated like shrines to a rock star, with cigarettes for cleansing, apples to sweeten her mood or something like that, and full bottles of mezcal as tribute. There's no rulebook for this one, just a mix of folk magic, Catholic prayers, and indigenous death rites. It's common to see followers kneeling in front of her image, whispering thanks or asking for help, and the favors they typically ask for aren't small. They beg her to cure cancer, protect them from corrupt cops, reunite them with lost lovers, or guard them during dangerous jobs, especially those that happen after dark. Oh yeah, she's also known as the Lady of the Night, and is believed to look after people living close to death, like people in adult work, drug dealers, taxi drivers, gang members, and even soldiers. Each color of her candle her followers light has a meaning. They go with red if they want passion, gold if they need money, white for peace, and of course, black for protection or revenge. Some go all in with 7-color candles for extra power. If you ever stumble upon a statue of the Bony Lady, she's likely to be dressed like a bride, a nun, or sometimes even the Virgin of Guadalupe, though the last one tends to ruffle a lot of very Catholic feathers. Some believers tuck dollar bills into her gown. Others offer up their most personal items like wedding rings, locks of hair, and handwritten wishes sealed with wax, depending on what they want. They say she looks after the outcasts, overlooked, the desperate, and the damned, and all she asks for in return is faith and a candle. Rajneesh Movement. The Rajneesh Movement looked like a peaceful yoga retreat on the outside, complete with followers in flowing orange robes, meditating, chanting, and preaching the wonders of free love. But under the incense and mantras was a power-hungry machine run by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho, a man who, depending on whom you asked, was either an enlightened guru or a criminal mastermind. Some people say he wasn't exactly the mastermind, but you get the point. Rajneesh mixed Eastern spirituality with Western-style group therapy, and a heavy dose of adult liberation. He called marriage a scam, families a disease, and organized religion a con. Basically, if it was traditional, he was against it. Meanwhile, he was amassing wealth, power, and a fleet of Rolls Royces. In the 1980s, Rajneesh and his followers moved to a massive ranch in Oregon and built their own city called Rajneeshpuram. They didn't just want to hang out in the desert. They wanted to take over local politics. When charming the locals didn't work, they tried bioterrorism. In 1984, they launched the first ever bioterror attack on US soil. They laced salad bars in the Dales with salmonella in an attempt to sway a county election. Over 750 people got violently sick, all for a few more county commissioner positions. At the center of the madness was Ma Anand Sheela, Rajneesh's fiery and ruthless right hand. She ran Rajneeshpuram like her personal fiefdom, ordering wiretaps, planning assassinations, and casually poisoning folks like she was stirring sugar into tea. Eventually, the whole thing imploded. Sheela was arrested and sent to prison. Rajneesh, ever the escape artist, cut a deal and got deported, but he couldn't find a place to land. No, seriously, over 20 countries told him to take his enlightenment elsewhere. He eventually ended up back in India, where he was somehow welcomed like a misunderstood rock star and resumed his teachings. Today, the Rajneesh brand lives on as a sanitized spiritual retreat, complete with Osho-themed books, meditation, and merch. All that's left of Rajneeshpuram are abandoned buildings, federal files, and the lingering smell of tainted salad bars. People's Temple, Jonestown. Once upon a time, in mid-century America, a man named Jim Jones had a dream. Not the kind of dream where everyone's equal and happy. Well, actually, kind of, but also not really. Jim started off preaching about racial harmony, equality, and helping the poor. He even opened a soup kitchen, offered free clothes, and helped with rent. But let's just say Jim's version of utopia came with a lot of strings. You see, Jim wasn't your regular preacher. He was a self-proclaimed Marxist who figured the best way to spread communism in Cold War America was to sneak it in through the back door, disguised in a holy robe. So he started the People's Temple in Indianapolis and began pulling off fake faith healings. He convinced people their cancer was cured by pulling bloody tumors out of them mid-sermon. Spoiler, it was chicken liver from the butcher. Since he was offering free healing, it's no surprise that Jim's flock grew fast. Plus, he promised a safe haven for Black Americans fleeing segregation. On the surface, it sounds like a really good deal, but behind the scenes, Jim wasn't preaching anymore. He was tightening the screws. He asked members of his congregation to sever ties with their families, sign over their possessions, and start calling the church their real home. Eventually, Jim moved his flock to California, then fled to the jungles of Guyana. South America convinced, or maybe just convincing everyone else, that nuclear war was right around the corner. In the jungle, far away from anyone who didn't buy into his BS, he built a paradise called Jonestown, where members worked like slaves under the scorching sun in a mosquito-infested commune. Meanwhile, he got to live like a dictator, surrounded by armed guards and loudspeakers that blasted his sermons. It was paradise for him, at least. In 1978, it all fell apart. A U.S. representative came to investigate and was murdered alongside some members of his team while trying to leave. Hours later, 900 people, men, women, and children, were made to drink cyanide-laced Flavor Aid in what Jones called revolutionary suicide. Some were coerced into drinking it, others did so willingly, and a small group were injected with the mixture. This incident went on to become the largest deliberate loss of American civilian life until 9/11. Children of God, the Family International. The Family International, formerly known as the Children of God, started in 1968 as a group of born-again hippies in California, and they were led by a guy named David Brandt Berg. It started with peace, love, Jesus, and casual apocalyptic warnings. You know, standard hippie starter kit. But underneath all the talk about free love and salvation, things were a lot darker. At its peak, the group was global. They had communes all over the world, and some surprisingly high-profile members like Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan, who were both raised as members. So how exactly did they operate? Well, the family had what can only be described as the most cursed missionary strategy ever. Flirty, fishing female members were encouraged to, let's say, romantically convert potential followers, because apparently salvation worked better when it came with a side of seduction. And yes, that was the actual pitch. The practice kicked off in the 1970s and, as you might imagine, caused a lot of backlash. The group claimed flirty fishing was just another tool to win souls for Jesus. But for many of the people involved, especially the women who were pressured into it, it was straight up exploitation. They also racked up disturbing allegations, especially involving how children were treated. And those accusations stuck with the group long after Berg became a footnote in cult history. On top of that, David Berg wasn't exactly what you would call a humble leader. He called himself Moses and the last end-time prophet, and would send out his teachings in bizarre, rant-filled Mo letters. These letters covered everything from the apocalypse to very questionable views on sexuality. They also kept his followers firmly under his control. Over the years, former members have come forward with disturbing allegations, especially about how children were treated. These days, the Family International is still around, but they've rebranded as a modern spiritual movement. Now, they talk a lot about spiritual warfare and claim to have these mysterious special keys to heaven, whatever that's supposed to mean. Heaven's Gate. The members of this group call themselves the Heaven's Gateway Team, like they were cast members of Star Trek on a mission to the stars. But instead of a spaceship, it was a rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. And instead of beaming up into space, they took a tragic and bizarre path to what they believe was ascension to the next level. 39 people, matching tracksuits, brand new Nikes, and a plastic bag over each head. We will get to that in a bit. Let's take it from the top. The group was started in 1970s by Marshall Applewhite, a man with preacher DNA and a love for sci-fi, and Bonnie Nettles, a nurse who believed aliens had plans for humanity. Together, they crisscrossed the US preaching they were biblical two witnesses, but with aliens and fax machines. Earth, to them, was a corrupted classroom, and graduation meant death. The bodies would be left behind, and the souls would hitch a ride on a spaceship hiding behind Comet Halley-Bopp. By the 90s, the group had gone digital. Members of Heaven's Gate had a website, wore uniforms, and ran a web design business called Higher Source. They lived like monks. No drugs, no personal identity, and definitely none of the activities that usually require candles and a locked door. In March 1997, when the comet got close enough, they made their final exit. They videotaped their goodbyes, mixed barbiturates into applesauce and pudding, drank vodka, and pulled plastic bags over their heads. Those who were first were tucked in with purple shrouds over their faces, and $5.75 in their pockets for some afterlife toll. Oh, and they were dressed in uniform. Black sweatpants, black shirts, and Nike Decade sneakers. They called it Unity. Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians were an apocalyptic Christian cult that caused one of the deadliest religious standoffs in American history. It all started with Victor Hotef, a Bulgarian immigrant who thought the Seventh-day Adventist Church needed some fixing. His followers, known as Davidians, built a commune in Texas called Mount Carmel, and after his death, things only got weirder. In the late 1950s, a man named Benjamin Roden popped up claiming he had a newer message from God and started calling himself the Branch. His followers became the Branch Davidians, and they believed Jesus had entered a new phase in heaven and that the world was on the brink of ending. After Roden died, leadership bounced between his wife Lois and their son George until a charismatic, guitar-strumming preacher named Vernon Howell came into the picture. He later renamed himself David Koresh because he claimed he had ties to both King David and Cyrus the Great. Koresh took over Mount Carmel the way any self-proclaimed messiah would, by getting into a shootout with the previous leader. Under his rule, things spiraled. Scripture got twisted. Child brides became part of the divine plan, and everyone started prepping for an apocalyptic showdown. Koresh saw himself as the Lamb of God from the Book of Revelation, except instead of peace, he brought stockpiles of guns. By 1993, the US government had had enough. ATF agents launched what was supposed to be a quick raid, but it turned into a 51-day siege. It all ended in flames, literally. FBI tanks and tear gas closed in, and a massive fire engulfed the compound. 76 people died in the blaze, including women and children. To this day, no one agrees on who started the fire. Some say it was Koresh's followers, while others believe the government was responsible. Tier 2. Aum Shinrikyo. Aleph. Aum Shinrikyo started off like your typical New Age spiritual group with meditation, yoga, and just a little doomsday talk on the side. Okay, so maybe that's not how spiritual groups are supposed to be. The group was founded in 1984 by Shoko Asahara, a partially blind man with a talent for recruiting and a flair for dramatic titles, but it didn't become a religion until 1987. Asahara claimed to be Christ, Buddha, and told everyone he was destined to survive an oncoming nuclear apocalypse. Naturally, this drew in a mix of the spiritually curious and highly educated, including doctors, scientists, and university students. At its peak, Aum Shinrikyo had an estimated 40,000 followers, and just like that, what began in a one-room yoga studio in Tokyo quickly morphed into something far more dangerous. By the time authorities started paying attention, Aum had amassed weapons, built secret labs, and developed chemical agents all under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. Criticism wasn't exactly welcome with this crowd. So lawyers, journalists, and rival religious leaders who criticized the group either disappeared or ended up dead. Inside the cult, members were subjected to harsh training methods, which included sleep deprivation, drugging, and physical abuse. In 1994, Aum tested sarin gas on the town of Matsumoto, killing 8 people and injuring hundreds. A year later, they carried out their most infamous act, the 1995 Tokyo subway attack. During rush hour, members released sarin gas across multiple subway lines, killing 13 people and injuring more than 6,000. The attack was intended to distract police from raiding the group's compounds, though it ended up doing the exact opposite. When authorities did move in, they uncovered a disturbing stockpile: weapons, chemicals, and even a Russian military helicopter. Asahara and several top members were arrested, tried, and eventually executed for their roles in the attacks. The group later broke into smaller factions and rebranded itself as Aleph and Hikari no Wa. But Japanese authorities weren't convinced by the makeover. To make sure history doesn't repeat itself, they put the 2 successor groups under surveillance. They are still under surveillance as we speak. Unification Church. The Unification Church was a global, holy matchmaking empire led by a man who believed he was the Messiah, which of course is nothing new. Sun Myung Moon, the founder, claimed that Jesus appeared to him when he was a teenager and personally passed him the baton to finish the job he couldn't, because, crucifixion. Moon accepted the task and set out to purify humanity by creating the perfect, sinless family. And just how do you build a world free from sin? Through really big weddings, apparently. The blessing ceremonies, as they're called, became the church's most infamous tradition. Thousands of couples, many of whom had never met before, were matched by Moon himself and married in synchronized stadium weddings. They believed this wiped out Satan's bloodline and restored their place in God's family tree. The doctrine is based on a very unique retelling of Genesis, where Eve didn't eat a literal forbidden fruit. She got it on with Satan instead. So yeah, in their worldview, everyone was literally born from the devil's hookup, and only Moon could fix it with divine matchmaking. As the movement grew, so did its reach and its controversy. The church built a multi-billion-dollar empire by dabbling in everything, from newspapers to schools. Moon's grip was tight. His followers often handed over their savings, worked for free, and cut off family ties. Critics and former members described it as financial and psychological exploitation wrapped in devotion. Moon even tried to reshape global politics by using his influence to support anti-communist causes and push for Korean reunification, with himself as a kind of spiritual monarch, of course. When Moon died in 2012, his empire began to collapse. They faced financial woes, family feuds, and there was also a pesky dissolution order in Japan. One son, Hyung-jin, went rogue and started Rod of Iron Ministries, which some have described as a spin-off where AR-15 rifles are considered sacred objects. Members of this new establishment openly supported political violence, but that is a whole other story. Order of the Solar Temple. In 1984, Joseph de Mombro, a French jeweler with a flair for fraud, and Luc Juret, a Belgian homeopath with a passion for spiritual TED Talks, came together and founded the Order of the Solar Temple. The OTS promised members enlightenment, cosmic ascension, and the occasional matching robe. These guys weren't just cosplaying cult members, though. They really believed they were reviving the Knights Templar and preparing humanity for a cosmic apocalypse. Members of the order were obsessed with the star Sirius because they believed that the ascended masters, aka godlike beings, lived on Sirius and had plans for Earth's chosen few. The OTS believed Earth was on a ticking clock. The age of Aquarius was coming, and only those who embraced ritual robes, candlelit ceremonies, and a hierarchy full of people with weird titles would survive the cosmic cleanse. It didn't take too long for things to get out of hand. Soon, ex-members were speaking up about their experiences, and the police began an investigation into the cult. However, de Mombro and Juret didn't plan to make a quiet exit. In fact, they were going for the opposite. In 1994, the two arranged a ceremony they called a transit to Sirius. Members were drugged, shot, and burned in a coordinated mass death across Switzerland and Canada. A whole family was murdered because they tried to leave when de Mombro decided that their newborn was the Antichrist. After the 1994 ceremony, another wave of mass deaths followed in 1995 and 1997 in different locations. In total, 74 people died, including the founders. Many were found arranged in ceremonial circles, as if waiting to beam up to Sirius. With Demambro and Jarrett dead, the group eventually collapsed. And to this day, no one agrees on what to call the OTS. UFO religion? Magical cult? Secret society? Suicide sect? Whatever the case, they existed, and people believed in them, which is a scary thing in and of itself. Church of Euthanasia. In the early 90s, while most people were arguing over grunge music or whether the internet would catch on, a software developer slash artist named Chris Korda decided that the real problem was humanity itself. So of course, she decided to start a church. Korda and another man named Robert Kimberg founded the Church of Euthanasia in Boston. Their mission was, save the planet, yourself. No, really, that's not a joke. It was their actual slogan. The Church of Euthanasia wasn't your average doomsday cult. There were no robes and no secret bunkers. Instead, it was a fully legal, legally incorporated nonprofit, pushing the wildest sermon you've ever heard. The earth is dying and humans are the disease. Their one commandment was, thou shalt not procreate. And if that sounds extreme, wait till you hear their 4 pillars. Self-deleting, which was optional but encouraged. Abortion, which may be required. Cannibalism, but only if the meat's already dead. And sodomy, because they thought it was the perfect way to have non-baby making. The church shouted their message through megaphones, staged street performances, crashed pro-life rallies, and once slapped the internet in the face with a video titled, I Like to Watch. The video was a mix of hardcore corn with 9/11 footage, electronic beats, and lyrics like, my steel melted and my tower's coming down. Yes, you heard that right. People were outraged, but Chris and Korda didn't care. At one point, their website featured a full self-deleting instruction manual until someone actually used it and died. That incident led to legal consequences and a quick takedown. But despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, the church became a spectacle of absurdity, art, and protest. Today, the Church of Euthanasia is mostly inactive, but the site still exists. Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. In 1989, in the hills of southwestern Uganda, a woman named Credonia Murende came out to say that the Virgin Mary had given her a message. The apocalypse was coming. Not a metaphorical one, a full-blown fire and brimstone end of days. And a former Catholic politician named Joseph Kibwetire believed her. Together, they founded what might be the most terrifying club in history, the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. The goal was to follow the 10 Commandments to the letter, which doesn't sound too bad until you see how far they took it. Talking was discouraged in case someone accidentally broke the 9th commandment about lying, and on some days, they only communicated using sign language. Soap was banned. Adult play was a sin, and they were allowed only 1 meal a day. But the real nightmare started when they picked a date for the end of the world, December 31, 1999. Members sold everything, fasted, confessed, and waited for the world to end. But the new year came and went, and the only thing that crashed was their credibility. So the leaders doubled down and a new date was set, March 17, 2000. This time, they threw a goodbye party, roasted bulls and crates of Coca-Cola, and then the church was set on fire with over 500 people trapped inside and the doors nailed shut. Everyone burned alive. At first, it looked like mass suicide, but when police started digging, they found more bodies in pits, latrines, and beneath floors at other cult properties. The victims had been poisoned and or stabbed, and some of them had been dead for weeks. In total, more than 700 people died. When the time came for them to pay for their crimes, the leaders of the movement vanished. No arrests were made. 12 tribes. Before the raid, before the lawsuits, before the scandals broke open, these guys actually began as a coffee shop called The Lighthouse. It was run out of the living room of a man named Gene Springs in the early 70s, Chattanooga, Tennessee. The 12 tribes started with a bunch of Jesus-loving teens who wanted something more radical than Sunday sermons. So they started living together, working together, praying together. Then came their own church, their own restaurants, and pretty much their own world. The problem is, that world got dark pretty fast. The 12 tribes believed they were restoring the true ancient faith. They wanted to rebuild the lost tribes of Israel, live like the early Christians, and wait for the end times. Everyone got a new Hebrew name. The leader became Yannick, and what he said went. Women submitted, men led, and children suffered. Former members say beatings were a common ritual. Infants were lashed with balloon sticks, while teenagers were whipped bloody. One ex-member said if a child messed up twice, they were beaten twice. Kids were homeschooled, apprenticed by age 13, and worked long hours in candlelit soap factories. Investigators caught 14-year-olds labeling products for Estee Lauder, pushing wheelbarrows and climbing ladders. The tribe said it was a family business. The law said it was child labor. Their theology didn't help their case. They taught that Jews killed Christ, black people were cursed by God, and that slavery was a marvelous opportunity. And by the way, they weren't hiding any of their beliefs. They printed it, preached it, and spoke about it openly. In 1984, Vermont police finally tried to shut it all down. They stormed their Island Pond commune in a massive raid and began snatching kids from beds. But it backfired. A judge called the whole thing unconstitutional, and so the children went back and the mistreatment continued. Spriggs died in 2021, but the 12 tribes live on in quiet communes across the world. The Process Church of the Final Judgment. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was basically Scientology and Satanism having a weird baby in the 1960s. A baby that liked to wear black capes and worship both Jesus and Lucifer. The cult was so messy that at one point there were suspicions that it was linked to Charles Manson. Mary Ann McLean and Robert Moore, two ex-Scientologists who seemed to thrive off drama and psychological control, woke up one day and quit Scientology. They then created their own spin-off cult with a pantheon where Christ, Satan, Lucifer, and Jehovah were all seen as parts of the same divine whole. The idea was to reconcile opposites like creation and destruction, good and evil, blah blah blah, and that somehow brings spiritual wholeness. The group first moved into a London commune, then fled to Mexico for a spiritual retreat in a jungle village called Chitul. There, a hurricane nearly flattened them. After it was over, the disaster was made into a myth. Those who survived the storm became the cult's inner circle, and everyone else was kind of a spiritual peasant. By the late 60s, they'd set up shop in America, particularly New Orleans, San Francisco, and even a place called Satan's Cavern in London. But their odd theology soon started to raise eyebrows. Then came the Manson murders. Although there was no solid evidence of a link, Manson did drop spooky lines like "Moore and I are one and the same." This statement raised more than a few eyebrows at the idea because Moore happened to be the name of the church's founder. Just like that, Manson's words turned the Process Church into tabloid food. The heat forced them to rebrand. The cloaks went into the closet. The devil talk got quiet. And eventually, the whole group morphed into an animal rescue charity in Utah. I bet you didn't see that one coming. Tier 3. Temple of Set. Michael Aquino used to be Anton LaVey's right-hand man at the Church of Satan. He even edited their newsletter. But eventually, he decided LaVey's whole vibe was too theatrical and not mystical enough. So, naturally, he performed a ritual to summon Satan, who showed up and actually said, "Actually, I go by Set now, the ancient Egyptian god of chaos." And with that, the Temple of Set was born. Unlike their satanic predecessors, Setians don't see themselves as devil worshippers. In fact, they prefer not to be called Satanists at all. They view Set as a symbol of individuality, willpower, and transformation. He's regarded as a deity who gave humanity the black flame, aka the spark of consciousness that allows for reasoning and magical potential. Setians don't worship Set. They aim to emulate him. Their end goal is to self-deification. They want to become gods in their own right. The temple is structured around degrees of progression. Members advance based on personal development, magical achievement, and their ability to guide others. It's a slow climb. Most don't get very far, but those who do help shape the organization. The temple is led by a high priest or priestess, appointed by a group called the Council of Nine. And here's the twist. Aquino wasn't just into robes and rituals. He was also a U.S. Army PSYOPs officer with access to actual intelligence tools, because apparently summoning chaos gods wasn't enough. He even founded a Setian order in Wewelsburg Castle, a site that had previously been used by the SS during World War II. These days, the Temple of Set is still active, though it operates mostly quietly and with far less public attention than in its early years. It continues to operate in the US, Europe, and Australia, spreading chaos, but very academically. Obeah. Obeah doesn't just live in the shadows, it was born there, raised in rebellion and built to survive when nothing else could. We're going to need a time machine for this one. It is the 1700s and the Caribbean is a pressure cooker of colonial greed, stolen people, and simmering rebellion. In the middle of all this, enslaved Africans brought with them fragments of their religions, their medicine, and their magic, all of which would eventually play a critical role in forming Obeah. Obeah was never a clean-cut system. It was more like a mashup. Part African tradition, part Christianity, part whatever works when you're desperate and surrounded by chaos. It wasn't just about belief. It was about surviving with the spirits on your side. Obeah doesn't have temples, choirs, or Sunday service. What it does have are people, Obeah men and Obeah women, sometimes even called scientists or professors, who know exactly how to bend the spirit world to do what needs doing. You want someone cursed? Done. You want a love spell? Or maybe a potion to give your enemy the stomach bug for a week? Obeah has a recipe for that. You want protection from a rival's evil eye or justice from a corrupt world? Yeah, that's available too. Or it could be, if you pay the right price. Now, here's where things get dark. The colonizers absolutely hated Obeah. Not just because it wasn't Christian, but because it freaked them out. Which makes sense considering it was used to poison slave masters, spark rebellions, and basically turn fear into power. So of course, they banned it and made laws against it, calling it fraud, superstition, and straight up evil. The thing about trying to ban something is that in most cases, it doesn't actually die. It just disappears into cracks, and that's exactly what happened. Obeah went underground, where it got even more secretive and slippery. And because of that, even today, a lot of Caribbean folks avoid saying the word Obeah out loud. They tell you it's risky and too close to the line between healing and harm. And yet, Obeah is still here, in Jamaica, Trinidad, Suriname, and even parts of Brooklyn and London. Sometimes it's just prayer and a candle. Other times, it's a bottle buried under your doorstep. I wouldn't touch that. Thuggee. Imagine this. You're a traveler in 18th century India, strolling through the dusty roads with a group of strangers who seem friendly. One of them makes jokes, offers you food, and maybe even prays beside you. You think, nice folks, but little do you know, you're being sized up like meat at a butcher's stall. When night falls, your new friend distracts you with small talk, while someone creeps up behind you, slips a scarf around your neck, and tightens it in one quick, noiseless motion. No blood, no screams, just silence. You've just met the Thuggee. Thuggees weren't your average bandits. They formed a creepy, organized network, some say a cult, that operated across India for centuries, robbing and killing innocent people when the chance arose. Strangulation was their signature move, and it was often done with a noose or a scarf known as rumal. They preferred it because it kept things clean. There was no blood, less evidence, and some believed it pleased Kali, the Hindu goddess of transformation, time, and sometimes destruction. It didn't only kill for loot. They had rituals, hierarchies, and a secret lingo called Ramasi. Some were born into it, while others joined out of desperation. Sometimes they'd slip victims datura, a hallucinogenic plant tied to Shiva, to make them woozy and easier to handle. On rare occasions, they would adopt the children of their victims to keep things quiet and help them stay under the radar. However, in recent times, modern historians have started a theory that the whole Thuggee cult might have been partly cooked up by the British to justify colonial crackdowns. But whether it's the truth or propaganda, the legend of the Thuggee and their beliefs is still one of India's most haunting stories. The Church of Almighty God, Eastern Lightning. The Eastern Lightning, also known as the Church of Almighty God, is a religious movement that claims Jesus is on Earth. Apparently, Jesus came back, only this time, he's not a bearded man in sandals. He decided to switch things up and make an appearance as a Chinese woman with no public name, no Instagram, and no desire to communicate with the general public. This group popped up in 1991 and began spreading mimeographed revelations across Chinese house churches. The messages were from a woman believed to be the second coming of Christ. The group refuses to reveal her name, but she's widely believed to be Yang Shangbin, and her partner in prophecy is a former physics teacher named Zhao Wei Shan. Together, they grew from whispers in house churches to an international underground movement now headquartered in New York. Eastern Lightning didn't just stop at claiming Jesus is a woman. They also started saying that the Bible is flawed. The Chinese Communist Party is the great dragon from the Book of Revelation, and we're all living in the Age of Kingdom, where God, aka Yang, is trying to purge humanity of sin once and for all. The group publishes these divine updates in a book called The Word Appears in the Flesh. You can think of it as their sequel to the Bible. For a while it seemed harmless enough, but things got messy in China, with members being accused of cutting off ears, breaking legs, and kidnapping leaders of rival Christian sects. The government banned the group in 1995 and started cracking down hard on them. Thousands of members have been arrested since then, and some have allegedly been tortured. Others reportedly died while in custody. So are they a persecuted church or a doomsday cult? That depends on who you ask. The Nuwaubian Nation. The Nuwaubian Nation is one of the strangest and most disturbing religious movements to emerge from the United States. And that's saying something. This movement was founded by Dwight York, a man who's changed religious identities more time than most people change their phone cases. He started in the 1960s as a black Muslim preacher, then rebranded into a pseudo-Egyptian prophet, then a UFO messiah, and somehow ended up as a convicted predator. By the 1990s, York had moved his operation to rural Georgia and built Tamare, a bizarre Egyptian-themed compound that looked a lot like a theme park designed by conspiracy theorists. Think pyramids, a golden sphinx, and armed guards patrolling the grounds. To outsiders, it was surreal. To insiders, It was sacred land and the center of their universe. The Nuwaubian doctrine was a fever dream of conspiracy theories, sci-fi, ancient aliens, Egyptian gods, and York's own made-up theology. One moment you're reading about melanin magic, the next you're being told that aborted fetuses live in sewer systems, and the Illuminati is controlling time. It was part religion and part cosmic fanfiction, all wrapped around York's Messiah complex. But underneath all the alien talk and Egypt cosplay was something far more sinister. In 2002, federal agents raided Tamare and uncovered a mountain of evidence pointing to York's real activities: child mistreatment, money laundering, and illegal firearms. York was charged with over 100 counts, convicted, and sentenced to 135 years in federal prison. The pyramid scheme literally collapsed. Even with the compound gone and York behind bars, a few loyal followers still believe he's innocent. They claim it was all a setup by the government to silence a spiritual leader. Meanwhile, the rest of the world remembers the Nuwaubians as a cult that went from cosmic enlightenment to full-blown criminal empire, with a leader who thought he was part pharaoh, part prophet, and someone above the law. The Church of the Lamb of God. If you thought sibling rivalry meant stealing toys or fighting over chores, let me introduce you to Ervil LeBaron, a self-proclaimed prophet, polygamist, and the man who turned family drama into a full-blown murder cult. Ervil started off in a fundamentalist Mormon offshoot, but when he clashed with his brother Joel over leadership and the right way to practice blood atonement, an old-school doctrine that basically says you've got to die for your sins, Ervil took the Old Testament route. In 1972, he had Joel assassinated by his own followers. Well, I guess that settles it. From there, Ervil went full dark mode. He formed the Church of the Lamb of God and built it around a divine hit list. If you left the church, you were marked for death. If you talked to law enforcement, death. Disagreed with doctrine, or even hesitated to give up property. Yep, you guessed it, death. Even his own daughter wasn't safe. Rebecca was 17 and pregnant when she threatened to talk to the police because she was angry about being separated from her infant son. And Ervil couldn't have that, so he had her killed and stuffed her body in a car trunk. Ervil wasn't just running a cult, he was running a spiritual mob, backed by dozens of wives and a growing flock of brainwashed teens who believed killing for the cause was righteous. He operated across the US and Mexico, carrying out a brutal campaign of intimidation, arson, and assassination. Even after his death in prison in 1981, his reign didn't stop. He left behind a manifesto called the Book of New Covenants, which doubled as a holy scripture and a mafia-style kill order. His sons Arturo and Heber picked up where he left off and continued the bloodshed. In 1988, they carried out a coordinated triple murder spree in under 10 minutes, killing ex-members, including an 8-year-old girl, just because their names were in Ervil's book. Eventually, the FBI caught up with the group, and 4 LeBaron siblings were arrested after one of their own turned them in. So yeah, if you're making a list of cults to avoid, maybe start with this one: the Apostles of Infinite Love. The monastery of the Magnificat of the Mother of God sits deep in the woods of Quebec. It's home to a group called the Apostles of Infinite Love, or if you prefer the more poetic version, the Order of the Magnificat of the Mother of God. They started off with the kind of religious zeal you'd expect from a group convinced they'd found the one true path to salvation. But it didn't take long for things to spiral into the type of chaos that Netflix would pay millions for. It started with Michel Collin, a French priest who said Jesus personally made him a bishop, and that God the Father crowned him Pope Clement XV in a heavenly vision. So naturally, he did what any self-declared pope would do: set up shop and start running his own rogue version of the Catholic Church. And let's just say the real Vatican was not impressed. After getting excommunicated, Collin teamed up with Canadian Jean-Gaston Tremblay, who was also on his own spiritual side quest. Tremblay claimed divine anointing and later crowned himself Pope Gregory XVII. Oh, and just so you know, these two actually had coronations with robes and tiaras. The whole shebang. Their little empires attracted hardcore traditionalists who were freaked out by Vatican II and church modernizing. At first, there were only a few people, but the congregation grew fast. The members gave up all possessions, lived in strict obedience, and followed what they called the rule for the apostles of the latter times, which they claimed were inspired by visions linked to the Virgin Mary. By the 60s, the place was crawling with followers and secrets. Over time, serious allegations included assault, physical abuse, and cult-like control began to surface. Some of the victims were children. In 1999, the Quebec police stormed the place with 100 officers. Tremblay was never formally charged, but the group's image took a nosedive straight into scandal territory. And yet, they kept going. They've been called a cult, a rogue theocracy, and a doomsday sect, but somehow, they're still out there doing their thing. In 2012, a new pope was crowned. There was no conclave and no cardinals. Just another guy with a holy vision and probably a strong taste for velvet robes. But hey, when you run your own religion in the woods, you don't need Vatican approval. You just need a crown, title, and enough people willing to follow you. Tier 4. Prince Philip Movement. On a remote island in the South Pacific, deep in the jungles of Vanuatu, there's a group of villagers who genuinely believe that Prince Philip, the late husband of Queen Elizabeth II, was a godlike spiritual figure. They really thought he was the divine son of an ancient mountain spirit who had traveled far away, married a powerful white lady, and would one day return. This wasn't some modern prank or weird internet cult. It was, and still is, a real belief held by the Kastam people of southern Tanna Island, mostly in the villages of Yauhanan and Yakel. It all started in the mid-20th century, around the time colonial officials were marching around Vanuatu like they owned the place. The villagers noticed how much respect these powerful men gave to Queen Elizabeth, and they put two and two together. If the queen was that revered, her husband had to be someone very special. When they found out who the prince was, he just so happened to fit perfectly into an ancient prophecy about a spirit son who would marry a mighty woman overseas. That overseas place was apparently Britain, and the mountain spirit's son was, well, you know who. It all made sense. In 1974, when the royal couple visited the island, the locals didn't get to meet Philip up close, but just catching a glimpse of him was enough to seal the deal. Word got to the British officials that a remote tribe thought Prince Philip was a god. And instead of laughing it off, the prince actually played along. He sent them a signed portrait. They sent him a ceremonial pig killing club. He posed with it and sent back another photo. 3 photos in total were sent over the years, and they became sacred relics kept by the village chief like holy artifacts. They even sent a delegation of Tanna men to Britain to feature in a reality show called Meet the Natives, where they got to meet Philip in private. And when Prince Harry got married, the village celebrated with roasted pigs, tribal dancing, and Union Jacks flying like it was the Queen's birthday. When Prince Philip died in 2021, the grief was real. The tribe mourned deeply by flying their flag at half-mast and sending condolences to the Queen. Some say the torch has now passed to Charles, who visited them in 2018. So, yeah, a king might still be a god somewhere out there. Order of the Nine Angels, or ONA. Ah yes, the Order of the Nine Angels. Or as I like to call them, the cult version of what if Satanism had a midlife crisis and joined a hate group. On the surface, they look like your average satanic cult. Pentagrams, hooded robes, late night chanting under the moon, the whole package. But if you scratch even a little deeper, things get real dark real fast. So dark that even other Satanists doesn't want to sit with them. The ONA became The ONA, because nobody has time to keep saying the full name while running in the opposite direction, showed up in the 1960s in the Welsh marches of Western England. They claim to have descended from ancient pagan mystics, but that's very unlikely, and their version of spiritual growth involves crimes, terrorism, and rituals that they call human sacrifice. The group was supposedly founded by a guy named Anton Long, who just might be a neo-Nazi named David Myatt. Myatt says it's not him, but let's be honest, the mustache twirls and manifesto energy are kind of a dead giveaway. The ONA is a chaotic cocktail of Satanism, neo-Nazism, accelerationism, and for some reason, space colonization. They believe the world is under a big bad spell called the Magian influence, which is code for anything remotely Jewish, Christian, or sane. How? By encouraging members to infiltrate extremist groups, buddy up with both Nazis and jihadists, and just kind of let chaos sort itself out. It's like a terrorist internship with fringe benefits. Their big spiritual roadmap is called the Sevenfold Way. It includes wholesome activities like camping alone for months, lying perfectly still in a field at night, and trapping yourself in a cave for a full lunar cycle. ONA doesn't do official membership. You just start. Self-initiate. No applications, no registration process. Just congrats, you're in. And somehow, despite having no leader or structure, their books and ideologies have inspired real-world violence. Proof that you don't need to be organized to be dangerous. Just loud, and maybe criminally insane. No Hana Sanpogyo. No Hana Sanpogyo was Japan's infamous foot-reading cult, where your souls held the secrets to your soul and your wallet. The man behind this was Hogen Fukunaga, a silver-tongued, self-declared reincarnation of Jesus Christ and Buddha. He popped onto the spiritual scene in the 1980s, deep in debt but loaded with charisma. By 1987, he turned his epiphany into a full-blown religious corporation with headquarters in Mount Fuji. His specialty was foot readings. He'd stare at your toes, nod seriously, and then tell you were doomed unless you paid for a spiritual purification seminar that costs more than some cars. If that didn't scare you enough, his followers will helpfully explain how your family was cursed, your cancer would spread, or your mind would rot unless you coughed up even more money for scrolls, ornaments, and salvation. Housewives were Fukunaga's favorite target. One woman forked over millions in donations, while another was strong-armed into buying her way into a 5-day retreat to cure her curse. Behind the scenes, Fukunaga was living like a rock star. He dressed in Italian shoes and $5,000 suits, while his wife spent $7,000 a month on numerous shopping sprees. While members were bankrupting themselves for his lies, Fukunaga was spending millions or billions, depending on who you ask, playing groupie with world leaders and celebrities. He even got into a Clinton White House fundraising dinner via a $325,000 donation through Yogesh Gandhi, a distant relative of Mahatma Gandhi, but that's a whole nother story. Eventually, the authorities realized that Fukunaga's healing practice and religious sect was just garden variety fraud with a side of spiritual guilt tripping. Fukunaga was arrested, charged, and then slapped with a 12-year prison sentence. At least 9 of his top crimes were also convicted, because there's no way he could have pulled it off alone. Raëlism. A man was walking through the French countryside in the 1970s, minding his business, when a spaceship landed in front of him and a little green man with almond-shaped eyes stepped out and said, "Hey, you're the chosen one." That's basically how Raëlism was born. The man was Claude Vorilhon, also known as Raël, and his new mission after his chat with this alien was to spread the gospel of the Elohim, a super advanced extraterrestrial species who, according to him, created all life on Earth using science and some serious biohacking. Now, the Elohim aren't gods. They're just really smart aliens who got mistaken for gods back in the day. You know, those guys in ancient stories, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad. Yeah, Raël says they are all hybrid messengers made by the Elohim to prepare humanity for the final prophet, which of course was him. After the Hiroshima bombing, Raël claims the Elohim went full red alert and decided humanity needed to grow up or blow up. So they gave Raël the job of leading us into a new age of science that would involve things like cloning and sensual meditation, whatever that means. The Raëlians aren't just about weird alien propaganda. They're organized. Like, really organized. They have a 6-level hierarchy, daily meditations, and a sci-fi flavored vision of paradise. They even tried to build an alien embassy with a landing pad, but the project faced challenges. And then there's Clonade, the Raëlian-backed company that claimed to have cloned a human baby named Eve in 2002. Well, what do you know? There's absolutely no proof. Oh, and if you think it ends there, it doesn't, because there's also the Order of Angels. This is a group of Raëlian women handpicked to be spiritual and possibly literal lovers for the Elohim when they return. They're expected to perfect their bodies, minds, and seductive skills, all in service of alien diplomacy. While they say they're atheists who love science, critics still call them a religious cult. But hey, if you're into aliens with no clothes, eternal cloning, and a utopia built on sensual meditation, you might have found your tribe. Tier 5. Aghori. Imagine if death metal became a religion, moved into a graveyard, and decided deodorant was a scam. That's basically the Aghori, an extreme sect of Hinduism based in India, best known for doing everything your mom told you not to do. They worship Shiva, but not the peaceful, meditative version you see in yoga studios. No, they're all about Shiva in his most terrifying form, aka Bhairava, the Destroyer. Their end goal is to gain liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, which isn't all bad until you hear about their methods. Well, let's just say their spiritual path comes with a side of corpses. The Aghori believe that everything in the universe is divine. Life, death, trash, treasure, leftover mascara from your high school emo phase, doesn't matter. It's all sacred. To them, the path to spiritual freedom means rejecting all social norms. Not just rejecting them, torching them, dancing on the ashes, and maybe using those ashes as body paint. We'll get to that in a bit. The Aghori live in cremation grounds, smear ash from human corpses on their skin, and meditate surrounded by skulls. And if you think that's intense, it gets worse. They also eat corpses. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. Occasionally, literally, as part of ritual practice. Okay, it's more like a rare ritual, but it does happen, and they're not doing it to freak people out though. Mission accomplished. They truly believe that by confronting the most feared and disgusting parts of existence, like death, decay, and rot, they can transcend the illusion of duality. To put it simply, if everyone else runs from it, the Aghori run toward it, barefooted and smiling. One of their most popular rituals is meditating on a corpse, at midnight, while calling on a fierce goddess, surrounded by the stench of burning flesh as a way to merge with the divine. Hey, I did tell you things would get a lot weirder. Now, where was I? The Aghori actually believe that all their terrifying rituals come with benefits. After they go through, well, all that, they're said to gain powers like healing, clairvoyance, or just being completely unfazed by anything ever again. Historically, they descend from the Kapalika set, an older, equally wild group known for wearing human bones and carrying out rituals that may or may not have involved human sacrifices and flesh eating. The Aghori took that torch, dipped it in holy booze, and kept the tradition alive. Oh, and according to legend, their founder, Baba Kinaram, was blessed by a god who literally offered him flesh as holy food. Honestly, that pretty much sums up the Aghori's belief system. If it terrifies you, it's probably sacred. The Brethren, garbage eaters. They go by the Brethren, but they don't really go by anything. They have no church, no address, and no real name. Just a ragtag crew in tunics and sandals, drifting across America, started in the early 1970s, during the tail end of the Jesus Movement. A guy named Jim Roberts, who was a former Marine and the son of a Pentecostal preacher, decided the world was too far gone. His solution was pretty simple. Ditch your job, your family, your name, and everything that makes life remotely comfortable, and just like that, you get instant salvation. Jim's pitch was basically live like the disciples, but like really live like them. So members gave up their homes, cash, IDs, and any ties to their past. They wandered around and scavenged from dumpsters, which is how they earned the nickname garbage eaters, and preached to strangers in public places. No flashy sermons and no televangelism. Just a beard, a Bible, and maybe a piece of bread from a gas station trash can. Being a member of this community was quite difficult, but joining wasn't any easier. First, you had to give up your family forever. Then you had to sew your own clothes, which were usually tunics with rope belts, and adopt the group's strict lifestyle. Women wore long, shapeless dresses, and men grew beards. They wore clothes too, but you get the point. Eventually, the media caught on. Parents launched search parties for their missing children, and the police got involved. So Jim Roberts made the group vanish. Literally. There was no more open preaching, no public appearances, and minimal communication with outsiders. Members were instructed to live off the grid, constantly moving and changing names and cities like spiritual fugitives. After Roberts' death in 2015, the elders took over leadership, and the group remained in the shadows. Today, the Brethren still exist, but you never know it because they have no social media and no mailing list. Just whispers, sightings, and the occasional long-lost son showing up on a Reddit thread. If someone you know joins the Brethren, chances are you'll never hear from them again. Happy Science. Happy Science sounds like it could be anything from a Japanese essential oil brand to a feel-good wellness app. But nope, it's actually a full-blown religious movement founded in 1986 by Ryuho Okawa, a former businessman who worked for a trading company in New York, who decided one day that he was, in fact, the human form of a celestial god being named El Cantare. According to their doctrine, El Cantare had been reincarnated throughout history as Buddha, Hermes, and even Odin. At first, the teachings of Happy Science sounds a lot like the stuff you would hear at a self-help seminar. Love others, pursue the truth, reflect on your flaws, and try to evolve as a person. It's all pretty wholesome, until you get to the part about angels, demons, alien spirits, and something called Space Spirit Yaidron. Since declaring himself the reincarnation of El Cantare, Okawa has released hundreds of books, many of which are spiritual messages he claims were channeled from dead historical figures. Jesus? Check. Confucius? Check. Abraham Lincoln? Also check. If you ever wondered what JFK thinks about Japan's foreign policy from beyond the grave, look no further. But that's not all. There's a dark twist. In the 90s, Happy Science got into it with Aum Shinrikyo, the cult behind the infamous Tokyo subway sarin attack. Aum allegedly tried to assassinate Okawa by pumping VX nerve gas into his vehicle's AC system. He survived the attack, so that's a win for El Cantare. While Happy Science was clashing with rival cults, it was also dealing with drama from within. Okawa's own son, Hiroshi, left the religion and publicly called it a scam. Okawa responded by claiming Hiroshi was possessed by demons and then sued him for defamation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Happy Science offered spiritual vaccines. They charged hundreds of dollars for rituals, DVDs, and blessings that supposedly boost your immunity. And then they claimed to remotely administer these vaccines once their New York temple shut down. Okawa passed away in 2023, but Happy Science is still going strong, with branches worldwide. Movies, books, political candidates, and lots of smiling PR. Klux Klan. The Klux Klan. Yes, I mean the group in the white robes and pointed hoods has been around since 1865, and is just as troubling as you'd expect. They're actually one of the most infamous hate groups in American history, with a long track record of racism, violence, and domestic terrorism. It all started in Tennessee, right after the Civil War, when a group of frustrated Confederate veterans formed what they claimed was a social club. The problem is that the club quickly devoted into night rides, church burnings, and lynchings aimed at black Americans and anyone who supported racial equality. Their leaders gave themselves names like Grand Wizard and Imperial Cyclops, which sounds less like a terrorist and more like a rejected X-Men villain. Though the first version of the Klan was officially disbanded in the 1870s, it didn't stay gone for long. In the 1920s, the second wave of the KKK appeared, and this time it was a nationwide thing. Fueled by anti-immigrant sentiment, religious bigotry, and the popularity of the film Birth of a Nation, the Klan went mainstream. They held massive parades, pushed white Protestant values, and counted millions of members, including politicians, judges, and police officers. It wasn't just about hate, it was about influence. By the 1950s and 60s, as the civil rights movement gained traction, the Klan re-emerged once again. Only this time, they were angrier and more violent. And that's saying something, since members of the first version used to burn churches for fun. The third wave was marked by bombings, assassinations, and targeted attacks on black communities and civil rights activists. In many towns, some members of law enforcement were Klan affiliated, which turned justice into a very one-sided affair. Thankfully, government crackdowns and internal divisions eventually weakened the Klan, and today it exists mostly in scattered factions. That's all the disturbing religions we have for today.